بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين وهو خير ناصر ومعين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين أما بعد السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. It has been brought to our attention once again by the admins that one of the allegations that have been launched against the scholars at Islaah is that in their researches or in their presentations, they are picking and choosing and presenting the public with only half the picture. And they're selectively quoting from the sources. They're using the source materials and the texts of the Shia madhab, but they're not presenting a holistic picture, rather they are picking and choosing. One speaker put it this way. I think he was referring to one of the presentations in which some of the opinions or research of Sheikh al-Mufid and Sheikh al-Saduq was presented. And his comeback, his response was, well, have you read the whole book of Sheikh al-Saduq and the whole book of Sheikh al-Mufid, for example? And yes, we are familiar with their works, but what does the whole book have to do with their opinion on a certain issue? And I guess what he tries to say is that, okay, if Sheikh al-Saduq or Sheikh al-Mufid, they support reformist perspectives on certain issues, there are other areas where they are traditional and they don't support reform. So why are you picking those areas where they support the reform? And why are you not giving coverage, or why are you not talking about those areas where they don't support reform? And our response to that is, it's not even about reform or supporting reform, going against reform. This is how these people are looking at it. From our perspective and from our methodology, it is very clear to us when we go to the sources, the Hadith corpus itself, the Shia Hadith corpus itself provides us with evidence that it has been corrupted and that ghulu has been injected and inserted into it. And this is not in dispute. Even the traditional scholars authenticate the narration of Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman from Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, where he informs us about this. Or the narrations of Hisham ibn al-Hakam from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, where he talks about this. Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman is very clear. He says, I listened to the ahadith of the companions of the fifth Imam, the books that they had collected, which contained the hadith of the fifth Imam. I listened to those books being narrated and I collected them. ثم عرضتها من بعد على أبي الحسن الرضا عليه السلام فأنكر منها أحاديث كثيرة أن يكون من أحاديث أبي عبد الله عليه السلام. He says, I took those books and I presented them before Imam Abu al-Hasan Ali ibn Musa al-Rida salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayh. And as I began presenting those narrations from the books of hadith of the companions of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, Imam al-Rida, upon hearing so many of those narrations, he rejected them and dismissed them. He discredited them. Imam al-Rida alayhi salam is discrediting and rejecting narrations which are where? In the books of hadith that have been compiled by the companions of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. And when Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman is surprised, he's like, these are the companions of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam. Are they lying against Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam? Because these are the books of the trustworthy companions. Companions who are known for their piety and their taqwa and their truthfulness. And Imam al-Rida alayhi salam explains to him that it is not the companions who are at fault. The companions were truthful. The problem is these books fell into the hands of people like Abu al-Khattab. إن أبا الخطاب كذب على أبي عبد الله عليه السلام, as Imam al-Rida alayhi salam says. That Abu al-Khattab, Muhammad ibn Abi Zaynab, this Ghali, he is the one who inserted and injected lies and attributed them to Imam Abu Abdullah or to Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, where in the books of hadith. So similarly, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam, in the narration of Hisham ibn al-Hakam, he says the same thing, that he talks about how Al-Mughira ibn Sa'id has inserted a hadith of ghulu in the books of the companions of the fifth Imam, Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salatu wassalam. And that's why he warns us and he says, do not accept these narrations. فَكُلُّ مَا فِي كُتُبِ أَصْحَابِ أَبِي مِنَ الْغُلُوِّ فَذَاكَ مَا دَسَّهُ الْمُغِيرَةُ بْنُ سَعِيدٍ فِي كُتُبِهِمْ. Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam says, all the ghulu that you find in the books of hadith that were recorded and compiled by the companions of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, all the ghulu that is there in those books. So Imam al-Sadiq is acknowledging that the books of hadith in which the hadith of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam was compiled they are full of ghulu and they have ghulu in them. And Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam is acknowledging this in our authentic narrations. But he's also explaining where it came from. It did not come from Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam wal-'iyadhu billah. It did not come from his trustworthy and truthful pious companions. No. He isolates the Ghali who injected the kufr into these books. He says it was Al-Mughirah ibn Sa'id, la'anahullah, who inserted, he says all the ghulu that you see in the books of hadith of the trustworthy companions of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, where is it coming from? It is not coming from Imam al-Baqir, it is not coming from his companions, it's coming from the Ghali Al-Mughirah ibn Sa'id, who used to hijack these books and insert and inject ghulu into them and then circulate them among the Shia masses. So basically, in light of all of these narrations, which by the way are authenticated by traditional scholars themselves, as I mentioned before in the series, and again we have the references, you can check them anytime you want. Ayatollah Sayyid al-Shaheed Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, in his advanced level Ilm al-Usul lectures, he authenticates these narrations from Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman and Hisham ibn al-Hakam. His students, Ayatollah Sayyid Mahmud al-Hashimi al-Shahrudi, they authenticate this narration. Ayatollah Sayyid Kadhim al-Hussein al-Ha'iri, he authenticates this narration. Ayatollah al-Sheikh Hassan Abdul Satir, he authenticates this narration. Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Sa'id al-Tabatabai al-Hakim, in his advanced level Ilm al-Usul lectures, he authenticates these narrations. So these narrations are not in dispute, and they're in the Hadith corpus itself. So the Shia Hadith corpus itself gives us evidence of the fact that it has been compromised, that ghulu has been inserted and injected into the most primary of the sources. These are the Usul Arba'mi'ah that we're talking about, the 400 Usul, which were the earliest Hadith compilations compiled by the Ashab of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam and Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. These primary and earliest sources got compromised. Al-Mughirah ibn Sa'id, Abu al-Khattab, Muhammad ibn Abi Zaynab and Ghulat like these, they inserted and injected their ghulu into these books. The result is what, my dear brothers and sisters? The result is that these sources, these primary sources, and then the sources that come after that, Al-Kafi, Man la yahduruhu al-Faqih, Tahdhib al-Ahkam, Al-Istibsar, these books of ahadith, these early Shia books of hadith, where do they draw their hadith from? Shaykh al-Saduq and al-Kulayni and Shaykh al-Tusi, none of them met the Imams. Where did they get their hadith from? They're getting their ahadith from these compilations which were transmitted from generation to generation. The compilations of hadith that were collected by the Ashab of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam and Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. These books, they came into the hands of al-Kulayni, and he copied the ahadith from it into his al-Kafi, and so did the other muhaddithin. But when they copied these ahadith, did they remove and sift out the ghulu? No, they had no means of knowing. They thought these are trustworthy books, so they took narrations from them, lock, stock and barrel, without removing the ghulu from them. And that's why these books today that you find in the current form, there is a lot of ghulu in them. So now what we're doing is, first of all, we're establishing from the Quran and authentic ahadith what ghulu is. We have a methodology for that. We go by the Quran and the authentic ahadith. In light of that, we identify what is ghulu and what was the aim and mission of the ghulat. And then after that, we isolate all the stuff that comes under the category of ghulu from the sources, and we try to present the original authentic teachings of the Imams which are in line with the Quran. That's what the Imams of Ahlul Bayt themselves instructed us to do. Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, in that authentic narration, he says, فَلَا تَقْبَلُوا عَلَيْنَا خِلَافَ الْقُرْآنِ. He says, never accept anything attributed to us that is going against the Quran. Never throw it away, reject it, discard it, return it to the person who brought it. but don't accept it. So Imam al-Rida alayhi salam is the one who has taught us that we should reject the ghulu. So what we are doing, my brothers and sisters, in our presentations, in our research-based lectures, is we're not picking and choosing in a negative sense. What we are doing is not unacademic. What we are doing is what anyone who is sincere will have to do. If our Shia Hadith corpus was absolute 100% haqq, and after that all the writings based on it were 100% absolute haqq, then you could accuse someone of picking and choosing. You see, picking and choosing is haram where you are dealing with 100% absolute haqq. So for example, with Quran, with authentic revelations of Allah like Quran, you cannot pick and choose. And even with the previous scriptures, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not allow picking and choosing. He condemns the Jews, for example, and criticizes them, a group of them, among them, in Surah number 2, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 85, where he says, أَفَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِبَعْضِ الْكِتَابِ وَتَكْفُرُونَ بِبَعْضِ فَمَا جَزَاءُ مَنْ يَفْعَلُ ذَلِكَ مِنْكُمْ إِلَّا خِزْيٌ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا وَيَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ يُرَدُّونَ إِلَى أَشَدِّ الْعَذَابِ وَمَا اللَّهُ بِغَافِلٍ عَمَّا تَعْمَلُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, what, are you going to accept parts of the revelation and reject other parts? Then what is the reward and recompense of such a person who does that, except that he should receive humiliation in the life of this world, and in the hereafter he shall be returned to the worst and severest of adab, of punishment. And Allah is not unaware of what you do. So in light of this, when you are dealing with something that is 100% haqq, you can't pick and choose. But when you're dealing with a hadith corpus whose transmission has been compromised, the Imams have themselves testified that ghulu has been injected. Now, the ghulat were not able to completely destroy all the haqq. All they managed to do was pollute the haqq, contaminate it, and affect its purity. So now what we have in the sources is haqq mixed with batil. So what we're doing is we are identifying and isolating the batil and rejecting it, and trying to rescue and salvage the haqq that we know agrees with the Quran, and then presenting it as the actual and original teaching of Ahlul Bayt. Now when we do this, our detractors come and say, oh, they're picking and choosing. Say, yes, we are picking and choosing the haqq from the sources, the non-ghulu stuff, we are recovering it, rescuing it, we're choosing it, and we're presenting it to the public. That's what you should also be doing. Unfortunately, the traditional side, they have also been doing the same thing. They're not presenting you the full picture. You see, in our sources, you have two very clear trends. If you go into the Shia sources, you will see there are two very clear trends. One is pro-ghulu, one is anti-ghulu. At every level, in the riwayat, in the narrations, you will see some narrations which are fiercely anti-ghulu and which assert the tawheed, the pure, uncorrupted, undiluted, undistilled tawheed as Allah presents it in the Quran. You will see narrations of Ahlul Bayt in the Shia sources supporting that tawheed and rejecting all the shirk and kufr and ghulu and bid'ah. That is one set of narrations that you have in the books. These are what we believe are the authentic teachings of the Ahlul Bayt. And then on the other hand, Maulana, you have a whole set of narrations which were injected and inserted by the ghulat. Those are pro-ghulu narrations. They contradict the Quran, they cancel the principles of the Quran and the claims of the Quran. They try to project the Ahlul Bayt as superhuman, supernatural, godlike entities who have all the sifat or many of the sifat and characteristics, qualities and attributes of Allah, the powers and offices of Allah. They control the universe. Everything is through them. So you have pro-ghulu and you have anti-ghulu. Now unfortunately, the traditional speakers who sit on the mimbar, these people, what they're guilty of doing, they're also picking and choosing at the end of the day. Because they're presenting to you half the picture, one side of the picture, which is the pro-ghulu. So far, the public has grown up on a staple diet of pro-ghulu narrations and pro-ghulu writings of scholars who support the ghulu. What we have done is we have presented to you the other side, the suppressed evidences, the crucial narrations from our books which discredit all this ghulu that the traditionalists and the akhbaris and the deviant ghulat have been promoting. So when we present that, the public is a bit startled. They're like, we've never heard this before. Yeah, obviously, we've not heard this before because the traditional side was also guilty of picking and choosing. Now, in their case, they were picking and choosing. They were picking the batil and choosing the batil and presenting it because they know that's what the public likes. The public, their aqidah and their beliefs, unfortunately, are not based on the original teachings of the imams most of the time. The public demands ghulu kind of content. So it's law of demand and supply. Because the public is inclined towards ghulu, the speakers and many of these unfortunate scholars also at times, they peddle the ghulu. What is in demand is what they will supply. But they have been selectively picking the pro-ghulu narrations. They have been suppressing and brushing under the carpet the anti-ghulu narrations. Those that you don't hear them from the mimbar. How many of you can say you've heard from the mimbar these ahadith that we presented from Imam al-Sadiq and Imam al-Rida alayhim as-salam, in which they tell you that the hadith corpus is contaminated and corrupted and the ghulat have injected their kufr and zandaqa and blasphemy and heresy into it? Do you get to hear this from the mimbar? No, you don't. Why? Because it's not popular. It undermines faith in the hadith corpus that these traditional speakers rely on to present to you all the khurafat that they present you with. Lions jumping out of carpets and all of that kind of khurafat. Right? So that is why they have been picking and choosing as well. Now, as far as we are concerned, yes, obviously, if the Shia hadith corpus was absolute 100% qat'iyyu sudur, it was absolute haqq, then you could accuse us of saying, well, you're presenting some narrations but you're not presenting others. But the issue is that who told you all the narrations? Even the traditional scholars don't accept that all the narrations are haqq in this corpus. So then naturally, once you acknowledge that there is a mixture of haqq and batil in the hadith corpus and in the Shia sources, then obviously we cannot afford in good conscience to be presenting batil to the public. Just because it's in the books, we're not going to present it to you and say, well, accept this because it's in the books. There's a lot of batil in the books. So that's why we have to sift through the books. We have to separate and distinguish the haqq from the batil. And that's what we're doing. But unfortunately, our detractors, they look at the batil that we're discrediting and rejecting because of its contradiction with the Quran and authentic teachings of Ahlul Bayt. They say, and they look at the haqq that we're presenting, they say, oh, they're picking and choosing. Of course we have to pick and choose. If we present to you the whole is a mixture of haqq and batil. There is venom and anti-venom. So we are flushing out the venom that the ghulat injected and we are supplying the anti-venom. So they're saying, oh, you're presenting only half the picture. You are picking and choosing. Yes, we are picking the anti-venom, my dear. We have to pick the anti-venom. You have already injected the venom of ghulu into the veins of the public, so much so that when we're presenting them the actual true teachings of Ahlul Bayt, they're not prepared to accept them because they're so used to listening to the narrations of the ghulat and the narrative of the ghulat, which you have force-fed them since their childhood. So bichara, they find it very strange now and they can't bring themselves to accept the anti-ghulu, pro-Ahlul Bayt narrative. So in any case, of course, you will have to pick and choose. Where you are not allowed to pick and choose is where you are dealing with absolute haqq. So you can't present half the haqq and hide the other half. But where you have clear haqq and batil is mixed, and even traditional scholars have testified and accepted that yes, the hadith corpus has a lot of fabrications and weak and discredited narrations in it, then obviously you don't have a choice but to sift through it, separate the batil, isolate the haqq, and then present the haqq and discard and dismiss the batil. And that's what we're doing. If you want to say we're picking and choosing, then okay, yeah, we're picking the anti-ghulu aspect because we know that is the haqq. We have confirmation for that from the Quran. So we're presenting the haqq and we're discarding the batil. It's not unacademic picking and choosing. It's not cherry picking. Rather, what agrees with the Quran we present, what doesn't agree we dismiss and we reject, and we invite and call upon others to do the same. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you for watching. Please consider subscribing. Also click the bell icon and choose the all option to get notified for upcoming videos automatically.